Good morning. This is Dale Fye, and I'm the facilitator for Access Users Groups Eastern Time. This morning, we're going to talk about denormalizing data for the user interface. I started out the week thinking I was going to do just a general question and answer session today, but during the week, I encountered a question on Experts Exchange where the original poster indicated he needed some help convincing his manager to agree on designing the table in a normalized manner rather than in a what I'll call a spreadsheet format. This is an example of what he displayed for us, and as far as what his manager was looking for, it basically replicates a form that they currently use for recording patient meds when they were assigned or when they were dispensed for each day of the week and for each medication. What he realized at the time was that this is definitely not a normal structure, and he was asking, how he should convince his manager to go with a slightly different structure that he mocked up to look like this. And now you can see that the first screen, which has days across the top and the medications down the side with listing a variety of information with regard to the number of doses, the amount of dosage, and what time of day the doses are supposed to be received, is pretty easy to read, and etc. But when you go to the more normalized data display that he presented, he indicated his manager just did not like that display, and he wasn't sure how to get around that. A number of the experts on Experts Exchange encouraged him to go with a normalized data format, but use a different presentation layer, as it were, for entering the data so that it looks like his previous screen, this layout. Now, some people were talking about using a third-party ActiveX control, a grid control. Some people talked about using temporary tables and just describing it. And I subscribe to the second method of using built-in access methods and using a temporary table to present the data in a way that's easy for the user to both understand and visualize. Now, more likely than not, the user's manager really didn't care how he stored the data. At least in my experience, managers really aren't interested in what the back-end database looks like. What they want is a user-friendly interface that will cause people or allow people to enter information in a format similar to what they're used to, without having to work too hard. What I did was, while these discussions were going on, I went ahead and mocked up a sample form to the one that the user provided. I've only done it out through Wednesday in this particular subform. Easy enough to copy the Wednesday data stuff out to Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But I just wanted to show you what that looks like in a presentation layer that you can do within Access, similar to what he had, but maintain a normal data structure as well. To do this, since the OP didn't provide any actual data in his, or a database in his question, I went ahead and dummied up some data. I created a caregivers table, a medications table, a patients table, patient meds. Those are all tables that are necessary in order to actually create this other table, which is the patient med dose received table, which this is the one where we would record doses actually received for each patient and medication type and the dose number for the day. The patient meds table identifies which patients receive which meds, what the effective dates, the start and end date are for that medication, and what the dosage would be for that. Table numbers is a tally table that I use for a number of things in this application, and generally I use it whenever I need a group of numbers or dates that need to be consecutive, and it works is very useful because I can always create a query off of that table. It contains just numbers 0 through 9. I can create a query that creates the numbers 0 through 99 or 0 through 999 or whatever range of dates or numbers that I am interested in, as well as I use it frequently for dates. This type of a structure for presentation layer would be employee hours worked. You might want to present the days of the week across the top of the form, the particular project, maybe in rows down the left-hand side of the form. And then within each of the cells in that matrix, you would want to display the number of hours worked on that project on a given day. The key is that you can't do that with a basic crosstab query. You can display the information that way, but it's not updatable. So what you have to do is you have to figure out what the data structure needs to look like in order to give you the correct appearance of information on your screen, and then design a series of queries that gets you to a situation where you have a temporary table that will facilitate that format. In our case, what I realized was that I need to do a couple things. I need to start out by creating a Cartesian join between that includes the dates, the days of the week, the dosage numbers, the patients, and the meds. So I used my tally table for doses. I used it again for days of the week. And then I used the patient meds table to identify which patients and meds belong on a particular day, which is based upon the start day of the week that's displayed on this form. Now, for the moment, I'm going to backdate that to the 17th so that you can see some of the data that I've already entered, and that we can refer to that again later. But in this query, what you'll see now is the patient ID is based on the combo box on that form. The number of doses are based upon the long number field in the doses table. And in the example he gave, he only used 4 doses a day, so I limited my doses to greater than 0 and less than or equal to 4. And because I only want to work with a week at a time, I limited my long numbers field to less than 7, which is basically 0 through 6 for my days table. And for the day of the week, I just add that long number value to the day that's displayed on the data entry form. And then I limit that based on, I've got a query here, a criteria here that says less than that value. So now what you'll see when you run this is you'll see my patient med ID numbers, and I've only got 1 and 2 in there that's showing up right here. We've got patient ID is 1, med ID 1, patient ID, med ID 2, and the range of dates that med is to be distributed during that period. I've got 4 doses per day for each of those. And depending on how you structure your user interface, you might not need 4, but because I was trying to simulate what the original poster had, I just automatically used 1 through 4. And then you've got the dosage date, basically the day of the week, and I included a header here for the day of the week, but you really don't need that. That is just there for information purposes. Once you have that query that generates the list of patient, med, dose date, and dose number for every day of the week starting on, in this case, March 17th, Then I need to map that to the actual days doses that have already been administered. So that's the second query does that, and this is my doses actual, and this is my Cartesian join. And what I've done is I in this result set, I want to include all of the days, all of the information from the Cartesian join. But if a record exists in the actual doses received table on for a given date, med, dosage number, then I want to record that number. So you'll see here that this is just a dose number, but for the caregiver ID, I use an NZ function to grab either the actual value or I assign a 0 because I want that to be a numeric value. And then for the dose at column, I also use an NZ function using the dose at that shows up in this table, or a 0. And then I can use the cdate function because I want this to be a date, and using the NZ function in a query will convert this value to a string. So I want it to be a date, so I have to use this explicit conversion function to do that. Now, I already have some data in here, and when I go to view this in datasheet view, what you'll see is all of these caregiver IDs are 0 except for the couple of days and doses that I have some data entered in, and all of the dose at values are 12 a.m. and that's actually takes the day value of 0 and converts it to a date, except for those that are in here. So after I've got that query, then I need to break that down even further because I need to identify some more information here. So let me back off here. I'm going to close this briefly, or I'm going to go to design view briefly, and I'm going to show you what the data entry subform looks like. What you'll see is I've got, because in the original, let me pull that back up for you to review. Because in the original there was a bunch of additional information over here on the left-hand side, I chose to mimic that general format. So I started out with displaying some information over on the left-hand side of the form. I got rid of that as I realized I was running out of space, but I wanted to keep that same structure. If you didn't need to keep that same structure and display information on the left-hand side, you might choose to do this a little bit differently and put your dose numbers as individual records in your user interface table, as opposed to columns. But in this case, I've got it configured as doses configured as columns. So you'll see that this first caregiver one, the name of that field is day 0, dose 1, and CG. And for the next one over, you'll see day 0, dose 1, dose at. If I drop down to dose number 4, it's day 0, dose 4, CG. The reason I do it this way is that it gives me the ability to use the name of the control as I'm to write code that will allow me to use that name, parse those values, and insert data back into the normalized table patient med dose received. And I'll show you how I do that shortly. But first we got to figure out how to get the information into this format. So we started out with, let's go back to this form, close this, open it up because I have to have it in form view in order for the code to work, for the queries to work, excuse me. We created this query 2, which gives us the list of all combinations of patient med, dose number, dose date, and caregiver. But I can't just write that to that table in order to get this structure. What I have to do is I have to break that out so that I have a column or a a column in the table for each caregiver by dose and day, and I have to break it out so that I have a separate one for each dosage time on each day and dose number. So in order to do that, I created a Crosstab query that uses that actuals table, or the actuals query, excuse me. I use the patient med ID as the row heading. I concatenate the day of the week number, which is 0 through 6, and the dose number, which ranges from 0 to from 1 to 4, into a field called that looks like this when we do it. And then I added in the caregiver ID number from that, and what we get is a crosstab query with the med ID, the day, the dosage number, and a value. You'll see day 0, dose 1, day 0, dose 2, day 1, dose 1, etc. And that goes all the way out to day 6, dose 4 for caregiver. Likewise, have the same situation set up for the dosage. And you'll see here I've got a 6 a.m. That means this med was actually dispensed. You'll see all these rest of these 12 a.m.s, which means there's no data in those columns or in those cells of the main data entry form. Now, I obviously can't update data in a crosstab query. So in order for this form to work, I have to push that data into a temporary table. To do that, I wrote another one more query, which takes the CG crosstab table, joins it to the dose at crosstab table, joins it to the patient meds table, and then to the patients and the medications, so that you can get patient name, medication name, the start date and end date of a particular med, the number of doses per day. You can put all of this information into that query now, and when you run that query, that's a make table query, it ends up looking like this. So you've got the patient name, patient ID name, med ID name, the start date of the med. In these cases, the expiration date was not entered. Then you'll see the number of doses of that med per day. If you have a column in your patient meds table that says the dosage rate, the number of milligrams, etc., which I would normally do, you could display that in here as well. And then you see these fields. These are starts out with the caregiver fields, and as you move to the right, you'll see that we've moved to the dose at. That's caregiver, more caregiver. You'll see that we've moved to the dose at fields. But you'll notice that all of these values in the dose at are now null. And that's because after I insert the values, run this make table query and insert the values in this table, then I have another query which goes through and cleans those values up so that they're all, replaces the 12 a.m. values with a null value for all the records that are not have not already been entered. And that's how you get this this structure. Finally, the last thing I did with this, if I go to design view here, you'll see that in these particular cases, some of these rows are disabled. And that's because for this, for example, for the Prozac med, he's only supposed to get 2 doses a day. So I set conditional formatting so that to disable those records that should not receive information. Now, the one thing that is not in this, I have not done in this particular example, is that in many cases you'll have a situation where the prescription might end, like in the middle of the week. Maybe it'll end on a Monday. So you could also use that end date of the query, plug that into this result set so that it shows up here. Actually, it is already there, but it's null in this case. And you could also modify the conditional formatting for these cells so that it looked to see whether this date fell within the start and end date range of a particular medication, and if not, you would also disable the controls for that as well. So this is just a simple example of how to generate a non-normalized temporary table, which can be used in a user face while still allowing you to use a normalized data set to store your data. Now, the one thing I didn't explain was how to actually do the update process. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to jump to this. We'll come back over here to Design View. Go to Design View here, and when you click on one of these and go to Events, what you see is I've just indicated right here in the After Update event, I've just called a function. Didn't have to pass any parameters to it because each control has a different control source, and I can use that control source to determine what day of the week, what dosage number I need to apply the information to. So, and that the other advantage of that is that I can highlight every one of these. I can basically highlight all of those, exclude those dose labels, and assign the same function to every one of those controls on the form at one time, which makes it really simple. Now, if I actually go out here to my code, you'll see that update normal function is actually in the code module for the form, behind that form. And basically what it does is it uses the control name of the active control that was calling the function, parses that using the split function, and gets the dose number, the integer dose number, creates a dose date, which is added to the start of the week value that was displayed in the main form. It creates a criteria string for searching the record set. It then opens a record set of the doses that have already been received or delivered for that particular patient. And then we just do a simple find first to see whether a dose has already been administered for the particular med on that date and for that dose number. And if not, we add a record and insert the patient ID, the med ID, the dose number, and the dose date. But if it's already there, we simply edit the function. And then depending on the last set of characters in the control name, if it's CG, we update the CG ID field of the normalized data set. If the last element of that control name is dosat, then we update the dosat value. And then we simply update that record, and boom, now we've changed the data in the temp table, and simultaneously we've changed it in the normalized data table, so that data is always up to date. The 17th, because that's where I have data for it already. And we can enter values, and if you look now in the patient meds doses received, you'll see those values in there as well. So I would like to thank you for joining me today for my lesson on designing denormalizing data for a user interface. I hope that you will join me on the Access User Group Eastern Time, the fourth Friday of each month, 0900 Eastern Time. Have a great night.